Doctors of Reddit, what made you say how the fuck is this person still alive? An unlucky lucky guy forgot his keys and was climbing back into his own apartment through the window. His cousin friend thought that he was an intruder and pointed a gun at him and pulled the trigger as the unlucky lucky guy opened his mouth to say don't shoot. The bullet went into his mouth and clean exited the back of his neck. After surgery, he was totally fine in a few days, somehow missed all major structures. Didn't even chip a tooth. Really pissed at his cousin. For my neurosurgery rotation in med school, edit THX for my first silver and gold, my second most upvoted comment has 33 votes, so 37k is pretty surprising. Unlike the bullet, this comment hit a nerve, edit 2, I didn't delve into why, but for some reason the patient didn't know that his friend cousin was in the patient's apartment, and the patient assumed that he was locked out, edit 3, I think I have a poor sense of what is interesting in medicine to the general public. This was interesting enough for me to remember from med school. Definitely made it to med students can't help talking about medicine even at parties, but it never struck me as that interesting. Edit 4, this has forced me to learn how to do a hard return, edit 5, maybe too many edits is rude? Relatively untutored in the ways of Reddit. Really pissed at his cousin hats free beer for life, hey cousin, you remember when you shot me with a gun? You get this round edit rip my inbox and thank you so much for my first silver. Remember that time I got that round? Yeah, you get this round too. A guy I know with cancer smokes 2 packs a day and drinks a fifth of Fireball every day. He lives in a trailer so dirty there is a half-inch of dirt according to his wife's mother. He recovered from surgeries in that trailer. Eventually we got word he was quitting chemo and was just going to accept death. 5 years ago he was given 2 months to live. He is now completely cancer-free. Life is just weird sometimes. When I was in college, there was a kid that exited a freeway at near freeway speed. Problem was, it was a construction zone at night, no lights, and it wasn't supposed to be an open exit. Drove right into a pile of rebar. One of the poles went through the car into his face and pinned him to the seat through his head. A couple of years later, I was in grad school, an anatomy seminar, and the surgeon presented that kid's case as a study. Not only did he live, the rebar had slid right past the base of the brainspinal column. It was so close, they had to twist it out like a screw because the ribbing on the bar threatened nerve damage. They literally rebuilt this kid's skull around his brain. His recovery photo was a totally normal kid smiling. He had a small scar on his chin. I say kid, but he was like 17, just to be clear. Edit, a couple of people looked up the story and posted it in the responses, for the curious. Be warned, there is one photo you may find disturbing. I had some minor details wrong, but I hope I'm forgiven since it was 15 years ago. Edit 2, everyone keeps bringing up Phineas Gage, but this guy didn't have any brain damage at all. My resident called me urgently one night and said I needed to come to the hospital. A young man was cut in half by a train. I asked why I needed to come in, there was no way he could survive that. She explained that somehow he was maintaining his pressure and wasn't bleeding out. When I arrived, I found that the force of train had sealed off all the major vessels from the pelvis down. I need closure. So did he. 2 that stick out. Guy gets shot in the abdomen, drops to his knees, shooter puts one through the top of his head near his forehead. Bullet exits through his jaw. He wouldn't stop complaining about how much he hates that the guy who shot him. Young girl driving a car gets T-boned on the passenger side by an Altima going at least 70 miles per hour. Her car looks like it was hit by an IED, so we assumed she was deceased upon arrival when the other crew on scene said our focus was extricating the people in the Altima. Girl driving was completely unhurt. By a Volvo. This is why the car talk guys would always recommend a Volvo to any caller asking about what car to get their teenager. Volvos are the Nokia phones of cars. Good God, they are tough. Volvos, Nokias, ducking Legos. Scandinavians sure know how to build indestructible things. Kind of a retelling, but one time a cadaver on which I was performing an autopsy had a lung which was flipped upside down. When I tried to flip it to the proper position, bloop. It flipped right back to upside down. After some due diligence we realized the lung was a transplant, and the surgeons who performed the transplant had attached the organ incorrectly. The lung had been fighting to be upside down its whole life in this other man. After 15 or so years, the man eventually moved in a way that allowed it to flip over, resulting in his death. Not really a how the duck is this person still alive, but more of a how the fuck did this person live this long with this condition. Wow, that's really awful if the surgeon's mistake cost the guy his life. I just want to know WTF he thought was happening in his chest at the time. Probably was thinking his chest hurt like shit. Had a lady walk into the hospital with her face pointed at her chest. Her C1 vertebra had somehow fallen off C2, with her spinal cord delicately draped across the odontoid process. No damage to anything. Repaired with slow traction and a halo for a little while. Still baffles my mind 5 years later. Edit, lots of questions. This little old lady said it happened slowly over time, but when she woke up from her nap that evening, something felt different. No traumatic injury reported. She had been sidestepping for almost a year. I haven't had time to draw a diagram yet, but I'll come back in a little while when I have a chance to doodle one. Edit 2, behold. My attempt at a diagram of how she looked. I'm afraid it doesn't make the situation any less scary. Older woman called 911 for chest pain. Her vital signs were shit and she had the look that anyone who's ever seen a patient about to die will recognize instantly. Her EKG suggested multiple blockages in her coronary arteries, and we had to put her on a ventilator shortly after she got to the ER because she deteriorated so quickly. Cath lab confirmed the EKG findings, complete blockage of one artery and 99% blockage of two other major arteries. Unfortunately, it was too extensive to resolve with PSI, so the only option was to fly her to the University Hospital in the city for an emergent triple bypass. It turned out that Shed had multiple episodes like this, but not quite as severe, over the last 6 months and had refused bypass surgery not once, not twice, but 3 times in favor of a Mediterranean diet. Well, at this point she didn't have much say anymore and family agreed, so off to the ER she went. I took care of her again about 4 months later and she actually seemed to have made a remarkable recovery. She triple bypassed a triple bypass. Edit, holy crap, my first gold and silver for this. Core. As a student had a young guy come in who self-inflicted a .22 to the inside of his mouth and passed out. Awoke the next morning, didn't recall the night prior, went to work. 2 hours into work he says he's not feeling right and starts acting odd. Coworkers call EMS. They take him in and while the ED is working him up they notice a mix of clear fluid and blood in the back of his mouth. They call ENT and get a CT head. Shows 11 or so bullet fragments throughout his noggin. The guy was acting by that time completely unfazed. I was very fazed. Edit, engaged phasers. Holy shit. Working in an Aboriginal community, a woman walked in complaining of a headache behind her eye. She was told to take a seat and as she turned around she had a butter knife sticking out the back of her skull. Apparently a drunk relative came home and stabbed her while she slept. Edit, yes, she survived. Was flown back to Townsville for imaging, then on to Brisbane for surgery. How strong do you have to be to stab a butter knife through someone's skull? 7 strongs, or 3 strongs and 5 drugs. I helped take care of an old dude who had one leg amputated, and had broken his other leg, so he was seeing us because of that. He was on oxygen and not being very compliant with using his wheelchair. We were talking with him and he was getting really argumentative. How am I supposed to chop wood in a wheelchair? Was what he kept demanding. When asked how he was chopping wood with one leg in the first place, he responded that he'd crawl into the woods and hop up to chop the wood. This was even more concerning. When the doctor asked how he was carrying his axe, oxygen, and the wood he chopped, he looked him straight in the eye and said, "I carry him on my back." Not sure if he was serious, but he was pretty dang grizzled and looked like he may have been crawling through the woods. So I'm imagining in my head a one-legged bear of a lumberjack with a face full of hair crawling through the woods in winter with eyes looking up and ahead, thirsting at the oak 100 meters from his cabin. Takes him an hour to crawl with 15 kilograms of life support equipment and a tree-killing axe. Does a one-arm push jump from prone and fells the oak twice his width with one stroke. Ties all of the 50 meters oak to his waist with a chain and crawls back. Takes him half an hour. Okay, now imagine going through woods. You hear a raspy breath and sound of someone being dragged, maybe you speed up a little. And then over a ditch a hand with an axe appears and a bemused grizzly of a man just drags himself over, shooting you a dirty look and just going on his way with a load of lumber on his back. Evening, he mutters and disappears over another ditch. This must be how some woodland myths have started. Any of the patients with flesh-eating bacterias and massive debridements, those are always a good source of what the duckery.